Okay, now it's okay on our side. We are okay here. Yep.
Okay.
Right, we can start.
Okay, we have everyone present. Yeah. Good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to the Asia Public Governance Forum on Sustainable Development Goals, co-organized by the Public Governance Program of the OECD Korean Policy Center, the Policy Coherence for the SDGs divisions of the OECD Public Governance Directorate, and the Korean Research Institute for Local Administration. My name is Youngju Chae, Director of the Public Governance Program at the OECD Korean Policy Center. And I'm very pleased to be your moderator for the opening and closing session. Well, before we start, I'd like to share with you a few housekeeping details. I'd like to inform you that the forum is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the KPC and KRILA's YouTube channel. Also, we are providing the simultaneous interpretation between English and Korean. To use this function, you can click the interpretation button on the bottom of your browser or download the Zoom application. And for those Korean speakers, if you will be speaking English, please set your interpretation function as default, please. Okay. Now, today's forum is intended to be interactive, so please use the chat function to share your questions at all times. And we look forward to lively discussions among you. Okay. Without further ado, I'd like to invite our distinguished guests to deliver opening remarks. Mr. Il-jae Kim, the president of the Korean Research Institute for Local Administration, will open the floor. But unfortunately, he is in a meeting with the minister at this moment. So as such, the vice president of the KRILA, Mr. Hae-yuk Park, will read his remarks on his behalf. The floor is yours, Mr. Park.
Good morning and good afternoon, Mr. Hong Tak-cheon, Executive Secretary, Korea Policy Center, Mr. Janos Barter, Deputy Director, OECD Public Governance Directorate, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and pleasure to address the Asia Public Governance Forum on the SDGs. Especially, I believe it is very meaningful that Korea Research Institute for Local Government, along with the OECD Korea Policy Center and the OECD Public Governance Directorate, are holding the Asia Public Governance Forum under the theme Contribution of Local Government to Achieve the SDGs. It's highly commendable that today's forum aims to share best practice from OECD member states to enhance sustainable governance standards in the Asia-Pacific region, including Korea, and seek ways to cooperate between Korea's and the local government, successfully promote sustainable development. Under the current circumstance in which sustainable development could not be overstressed with living with COVID-19, today's forum is an opportunity to enforce institutional mechanisms related to sustainable development and to suggest direction for secure policy coherence between national and local governments. KRILA is conducting related research in various fields to strengthening sustainable development at the local government level, and today's forum is an extension of such efforts. Based on the diverse opinions discussed today, we will identify major national and local government policies and priorities necessary to accelerate the implementation of sustainable development and reflecting them in future research objects of our institute. I truly hope this forum will serve a meaningful place of discussion to identify the main role of state and local governments for sustainable development and to seek ways to strengthen local government capabilities. I would like to the OECD Korea Policy Center and the OECD staff for all their support. In addition, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Ernesto Sorina Morales, Mr. Jang Jaegun Jung, Mr. Stefano Marta, and Mr. Seungyu Park for taking time away from their schedules to deliver the presentation today's. Ms. Karina Lindberg and Professor Hyunok Lee for being the moderator for each sessions and everyone participating in the discussion. In closing, I would like to extend my gratitude to the distinguished participants from around the world and all those who worked so hard in organizing these meaningful forums. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President. And now it is time for Dr. Hong Taek-jeon, the Executive Secretary of the OECD Korea Policy Center, for his remarks. But I'd like to ask your understanding. Unfortunately, he is not able to participate at this moment. So Ms. Hyun-jung Lee, Director General of the Public Governance Program at the OECD Korea Policy Center, will read his remarks on his behalf. Ms. Hyun-jung Lee, please.
Good afternoon and good morning. As introduced, I'm Hyun-jung Lee, Director General of the Public Governance Program at the OECD Korea Policy Center. Thank you very much for joining us today, despite the inconvenience of the time difference. We appreciate your joining of the ASEAN Public Governance Program on SDGs, co-hosted by the OECD Korea Policy Center, the OECD, and the Korean Research Institute of Local Administration. Asia Public Governance Forum, or the IPG Forum, is the platform through which government officials and experts from the OECD member countries and non-member countries exchanges policy experiences and best practice, thereby promoting good public governance in the Asia-Pacific regions. Today's forum is focused on the sustainable development goals, in particular on the role of policy coherence between central and local governments and the role of local governments in achieving the SDGs. Since the introduction of the SDGs, the idea received much deserved attention on a global scale. It clearly identified the objective we need to achieve as a global society and allowed us to quantify our progress towards the goals. Despite its noble intention, however, the progress has been slower than we had hoped for, and we are facing another unexpected hurdle on its way due to the pandemic. While everyone is affected by the COVID-19, its impact certainly has been unequal, hitting those who are already disadvantaged the hardest. In this sense, the topic is timely and opportune, as policy coherence is the special factor that can amplify the impact of our pursued policy, and yet achieving it requires multi-layered dialogues and efforts among all levels of governments and the actors of society. As the OECD possesses a clearly policy coherence for sustainable development integrates the different dimensions of well-being and sustainability and policymaking in balanced manner. And when you develop a target that is SMART, which stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, will achieve SDGs more promptly with the synergies arising from the interlinkage between the goals. For this reason, I appreciate your participation and hope today's exchange among us be the first of many conversations in discussing the vertical coherence between different levels of governments and enhancing the capacity of everyone involved in the process. Understanding the importance of local government in this process, the KRILA's involvement is much appreciated as they are the key partner in actualizing the SDGs in Korea by strengthening Korea's institutional mechanism at a local level. I would also like to thank you, your good partner, OECD, or to be specific, the policy coherence for SDG divisions under the leadership of Tatiana Pavlova for their endeavor on the topic, which includes building up frameworks and toolkits to attain policy objectives and encouraging actions from the key actors in accordance with the OECD recommendation on policy coherence for sustainable development. Lastly, I would like to express my gratitude to each and every participant. I have been informed that we have the presence of many experienced experts who have lots to share, and they have joined us even though it's really early in the morning in case of Europe. So thank you, and I look forward to listening to the discussion among you. The OECD Korea Policy Center, in cooperation with the OECD, will continue to the bridge among the experts and government officials for better public governance and better public policy in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we would like to invite Mr. Janis Barter, the Deputy Director of the Public Governance Directorate of the OECD. Mr. Barter, please.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pleased to join Vice President Park and Director General Lee in welcoming you to the Asia Public Governance Forum. We appreciate very much the fruitful collaboration with the Korea Policy Center and the Korea Research Institute for Local Administration. Since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, Asian countries have made commendable progress on sustainable development in areas such as food security, health, education, innovation, infrastructure. However, the COVID-19 crisis put at risk this progress. Inequalities are on the rise, and an estimated 89 million people have been pushed into extreme poverty. Unemployment increased by 15 million in the region last year. According to the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, the region is not on track to achieve any of the 17 SDGs by 2030. According to the current trajectory, the region may not even achieve 10% of the SDGs targets. So today's forum therefore comes at a very critical time. Making sure that recovery measures do not sideline long-term sustainability objectives will be a key in this context. Why this is not an easy undertaking, there are many things governments can do to strengthen policy coherence for sustainable development. First, carefully managing the numerous trade-offs between sustainable development goals and other policy objectives. For example, I mentioned the stimulus packages. So how to boost and how to combine economic growth and avoiding the undermining of the climate commitments. Particularly after the COP26 last week, where government agreed to revisit their commitments by the end of 2022. This is a very encouraging to keep the 1.5 Celsius target from the Paris Agreement. Second, considering potential negative spillover effects on other countries. This is the transboundary impact throughout the policymaking cycle. The COVID-19 had disruptions in global supply chains, including shortages of essential goods like medical products or personal protective equipment. Countries that are heavily dependent on tourism or official development assistance, they have been particularly hard hit, including the Asia-Pacific regions. Third, aligning national objectives and local needs with global and regional commitments. This relates to strengthening the capacity of national governments to address global challenges, but it also calls for balancing central steering capacities against local autonomy. The OECD estimates at least 105 out of the 169 targets, underlying the 17 SDGs, they will be not reached without proper engagement and coordination with regional and local governments. But yet only a third of the voluntary national reviews reported by central governments in Asia, they have actually consulted local governments in this process. In many countries, local governments are lacking financial resources and capacities need to engage in this process. So the OECD work shows that horizontal and vertical coherence is dependent on the underlying governance, structures, and processes in place at the local, national, and global level. So that's why I'm very pleased when you made references to the OECD recommendation on policy coherence for sustainable development, because this offers a framework for coordinated action and specific guidance across sectors and levels of government. Our discussion today, this is really timely to help you in identifying the ways in which we all work together to enhance policy coherence for sustainable development. The sessions will explore good institutional practices from all around the world, both at the national and the local level. We really hope that this will facilitate a broader knowledge development through this exchange between OECD countries and the Asia-Pacific. Drawing on the expertise of the extensive policy network, the OECD stands ready to support your efforts. We support peer review dialogue. This is your network. This is your platform. So I invite each participant in today's forum, please share your insight, share your experience, and identify how the OECD can support through very specific actions like in-depth reviews of the subnational arrangements. So thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to this collaboration and supporting you on how to build back from the COVID-19 crisis. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Barter. Well, this wraps up the opening session. Well, and now I give the mic to the moderator of the first session, Ms. KRILA Lindberg, yes, who is a policy analyst of the PCSDG. Thanks, KRILA.
Good morning, and thank you, Director Che. Yes, my name is KRILA Lindberg. I work in the Policy Coherence for Sustainable Development Division, PCSD, and I'm very pleased to be moderating this first session today on how to enhance policy coherence for sustainable development. We will talk about why we need PCSD and how we can enhance it, because we know this is not easy. We've heard it now from our three opening speakers. It requires navigating multiple trade-offs, which again is even more complicated now than ever before, where governments have to balance short-term economic recovery measures with long-term sustainability commitments. So in today's first session, we will benefit from two main presentations. We will then have three discussants that will tell us a little bit about their work and also react to the key presentation. So I will give the floor now to my colleague, Ernesto Soria Morales, who is head of the Policy Coherence Unit, to talk to us about the governance and policy coherence challenges in SDG implementation. Ernesto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Karina. Good afternoon, everyone in Korea. Good morning from Paris. I'm very pleased to give this introductory presentation on the work of OECD on governance for the SDGs and policy coherence for sustainable development. I will divide my presentation into four main parts. I want to give you just a very brief of the background of the integrated nature of the Sustainable Development Goals, and then explain why we've seen through our analysis in the past 5 years that nature of the agenda entails important governance challenges and the need to strengthen not only the institutional mechanisms to deal with this challenge, but also capacities in public administration to deal with increasingly complex global challenges. Then I will go more into the details of the role of policy coherence for sustainable development as a means of implementation for the Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll finish the presentation just to provide you a little bit more information on how we are supporting not only OECD member countries in achieving this agenda through tools and targeted support and peer learning and different means, but also how we are contributing to the global efforts and supporting partner countries in this endeavor. So let me start with the background. And as you know, the Sustainable Development Goals are an invisible agenda, and the 2030 agenda actually states that the 17 SDGs balance the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. So to help make progress towards this balance, the SDGs include a specific target under the means of implementation related to policy coherence. And this target calls on all countries to strengthen their mechanisms for policy coherence. This means that the SDGs were not designed as isolated targets, but to be mutually supported. And this implies different ways of working. This implies, for example, that taking action in one goal will have necessarily positive or perhaps negative repercussions for other goals or other sectors. As shown in this diagram that it comes from the Global Sustainable Development Report, this is a report that was commissioned by the UN to a group of scientists, and based on scientific evidence, there is an assessment of all the interactions across the 169 targets. And this report and this assessment reveals that there is a very important, there are important trade-offs across the agenda, but also it reveals that there are more positive interactions between the goals, as illustrated in the diagram with the blue dots. You will see that the blue dots represent the benefits that could be achieved by addressing the agenda in an integrated manner, breaking out silos. So basically, coherence in this context is a means to address trade-offs, to harness co-benefits, to address transboundary impacts, as Mr. Bertok, my deputy director, highlighted, and it also, in the context of the SDGs, policy coherence is to make sure that we look beyond short-term interests and take informed decisions for the long term. So basically, it's about turning vicious cycles into virtuous cycles when we address this agenda that has multiple goals in economic, social, and environmental domains. Now, what are the challenges in SDG implementation that we have analyzed, that we have seen in the past 5 years, in the past 6 years since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda? Well, basically, we've seen that countries face similar governance challenges in SDG implementation, regardless the income level. 6 years of implementing the SDGs have revealed that countries struggle to create whole-of-government approaches to addressing the SDGs. Many countries have yet to integrate the goals into core governance systems, such as budgeting, public procurement, monitoring, and evaluation. For example, the graph that you see on the screen comes from our OECD flagship publication, Governance at a Glance, that was launched this year, which highlights that only 30% of governments in OECD countries practice green budgeting. And there are also frequent gaps in leadership skills and competences required to deliver on such a cross-cutting agenda. And of course, as mentioned, another challenge is to ensure that domestic policies avoid negative economic, social, and environmental externalities beyond national borders and for future generations. So these challenges often relate to the way we work, to the institutional and individual capacities that must be in place to successfully navigate the complexities of SDG implementation. So our work aims at helping countries equip policymakers with the necessary institutional mechanisms and policy tools to enhance policy coherence for sustainable development as one of the key means of implementation for the 2030 Agenda. We do this in response to the growing demand by OECD members and partner countries to deal with the how of coherent 2030 Agenda implementation. This is confirmed. These challenges are confirmed from a survey that we conducted early in 2020, with responses from policy practitioners from 37 OECD countries and 48 non-member countries. I mean, this survey indicated a strong country demand for support to strengthen leadership and institutional capacities for SDG implementation. Almost 80% of the policy practitioners that we surveyed indicate that they are struggling with the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and almost 75% perceive governance or leadership-related challenges as an obstacle to ensure an integrated implementation of the SDGs. And in this survey, we also heard from respondents that additional support to SDGs implementation, including expert reviews, access to knowledge and recommendations, technical guidance from thematic experts, policymaker advice and experience, and peer-to-peer learning and trainings was critical for them to deal with this agenda. But these challenges are also compounded by the impact of COVID on sustainable development goals implementation. As you know, the economic, financial, social, and human consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic are reversing decades of global progress in key areas of the sustainable development goals. According to the most recent UN Secretary General Progress Report on the SDGs, and this was also highlighted at the beginning, the pandemic-related economic downturn pushed between 119 and 124 million people into extreme poverty last year. And the crisis is also exacerbating inequalities. In 2020, the equivalent of 255 million full-time jobs were lost. And as you know, education is also an area where global is becoming a global challenge, with an additional 100 million children and young people that fell below the minimum reading proficiency level as a consequence of the pandemic. But the consequences of the pandemic are also bringing to light more complex and interconnected challenges that cut across policy fields. The pandemic, for example, has further exposed the complex interconnections between the expansion of human settlements, biodiversity degradation, and the transmission of infectious diseases. Yet the institutional mechanisms, the capacities, and the different way of working required in public and administrations to deal with these coherence issues and cope with these interconnected challenges in a more balanced manner often do not exist in many countries. And this is why at the OECD, we are really committed to support countries in enhancing their capacities through policy coherence and achieving these global agendas. We see, as you know, coherence is a key principle of governance, and it is essential to deal with fragmented government action, to reduce inefficiency, overlaps, and duplications in government operations, and of course, reduce wasteful spending, which is very important in today's context. In the United States, for example, the US Government Accountability Office has estimated that actions from Congress and executive branch agencies to reduce fragmentation, overlap, and duplication in government programs in the last decade have generated more than $200 billion in financial benefits. So we see that coherence is essential to improve the efficiency of government processes. But beyond that key objective, we see policy coherence as an approach, as a tool to maximize synergies and minimize trade-offs in implementing highly interconnected sustainable development goals, but also as a means to balance domestic and international priorities when it comes to promote sustainable development. And importantly, to address the transboundary and long-term effects of policies. So policy coherence becomes a tool to inform decision-making and to inform policies on the consequences that decisions can have, not only in the country, but elsewhere and for future generations. So based on this concept of policy coherence, we at the OECD have developed analytical tools to understand that in this context, as mentioned, policy coherence is to deal with more complex issues, to increase the capacity of policy makers, decision makers, and practitioners, and the public administration in general, to make informed choices about sustainable development, considering different dimensions at the national level, at the international level, and at the local level. We are living in an increasingly interconnected world where countries necessarily impact on each other, and this requires new perspective, new tools, and new ways of working. And based on of course, coherence is needed now more than ever with the pandemic, because as also was mentioned at the beginning on the opening, coherence will be essential to make sure that the responses to COVID are aligned with our commitments and long-term goals of sustainable development, but also our commitments to deal with climate change. Based on this, at the OECD, we are supporting members and partners through different means. First of all, I just want to reiterate the instrument that was recently adopted by the Council, the OECD recommendation on policy coherence for sustainable development, which provides guidance, provides a guidance on key elements that need to be in place in public administrations and that need to work in an interconnected manner to ensure that policies are coherent with sustainable development. So, and the recommendation refers to 8 guiding principles, which are related to processes and working methods that, based on 20 years of experiences in OECD countries, we know that these mechanisms have helped improve policy coherence in governments from different political and administrative traditions. There is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to deal with policy coherence, but we know from the 20 years of experience of analyzing efforts in improving policy coherence that there are at least these 8 common mechanisms that are relevant in all different contexts, including in developing country contexts. And as was highlighted at the beginning, this recommendation is based on the premise that the ability to consistently develop and implement coherent policies in all areas of public policies is dependent on the processes, systems, structures, and tools used by governments to manage and coordinate policy at all levels. There is no particular sequencing in this, but we know that all these mechanisms need to be in place. And actually, many countries have in place these basic mechanisms, but they are sometimes not used proactively to promote policy coherence. Well, I don't want to take too much time to go into the details. Of course, if there are any questions, I will be happy. But just to highlight very quickly that, for example, political commitment is a precondition for policy coherence. As you know, policy coherence is not just a technical solution. It requires, it entails, you know, a lot of conflicts of interest, dealing with with different interests across the society, across the stakeholders, and requires strong support to orient the whole government towards sustainable development. Of course, long-term vision is necessary to support not only the current generation, but to consider what is going to be necessary for future generations to have at least the same level of well-being that we have today. And of course, policy integration, where we have different tools, governments have different tools to promote policy integration, such as you know, the budget process, which is critical to align priorities, the procurement process, evaluation policy, regulatory policy. There are many tools that countries could use to enhance policy integration and build synergies across economic, social, and environmental areas. An important element of coordination and ensuring a whole of government coordination when it comes to policy coherence is the specific mandates that these mechanisms of coordination should have to ensure that policy divergences are resolved. We've seen for many years in the experience, even when countries have a strong coordination mechanisms, if this coordination mechanism lack of this specific mandate, sometimes it's very difficult to resolve the policy tensions or the trade-offs that might emerge from competing priorities in public policies. Of course, subnational engagement, as also was mentioned at the beginning, is critical because many of the areas that are essential to deal with the Sustainable Development Goals are, for example, investments in education, in land, in water, take place at the subnational level. So working with subnational level, it is essential to ensure what we call vertical coherence, not just the horizontal coherence across sectors, but vertical coherence between different levels of government to ensure alignment and integration in SDGs. Of course, engage all stakeholders in identifying challenges, setting priorities, and mobilizing resources is also essential. And because we know from experience that many of the issues of incoherence or many of the barriers to policy coherence stem from the different perceptions and the different interests of stakeholders. So there is a need to have proper mechanisms to engage different stakeholders in the process of policy making and policy decision. And very important for policy coherence is the tools, the necessary tools and systems to consider more systematically the effects of policies, not only on the well-being in on one society or one country, but what are the implications of the policy decisions in one particular country, the implications on global sustainability, but also what could be the effects on other countries, and in particular developing countries, which have been the most affected by the COVID. And of course, monitoring and reporting systems are essential to inform decision-making and adjust policies in light of the information that these monitoring and reporting systems are capturing in terms of the potential negative effects of policies. So this is the way we see the policy coherence system, the mechanisms that should be in place, and based on these elements in the recommendation, we develop some practical tools. There is also apart from the institutional mechanisms that, of course, require to be in place, there is also the important aspect of the institutions need to be equipped with the adequate human resources. As you know, in today's fast-changing world, a professional, capable, and responsive public service is more important than ever to deliver on these agendas and to build, trust in public institutions. So the cross-cutting nature of the policy challenges we are facing calls for strengthening, the capacities in the public service. And we at the OECD have mapped at least 4 broad clusters of skills that underpin high-performing civil services. For example, you see there are policy advisory skills, which relates to using technology and a broad range of perspectives to provide timely and evidence-informed advice to political decision makers. Of course, engagement skills, as mentioned, is very important because public servants need to work more directly with citizens, business, associations, and other groups to improve service and co-create solutions that work for sustainable development. Of course, another important area is commissioning skills. I mean, designing and using different types of contracts to access services in a more efficient way and help implement policy and ensure impact. And of course, network management skills is also an essential element for developing a shared understanding of common policy challenges through communication and trust building. Of course, at the OECD, we have developed different, apart from the policy coherence recommendation, different instruments that support governments in different areas. For example, the recommendation on public service leadership and capability is also an area that is essential to support an integrated implementation of the SDGs. And just I want to mention some of the tools we have developed based on the recommendation. We have a one-stop shop portal to knowledge resources on policy coherence with guidance, with self-assessment tools, with collecting good practice examples from around the world, and thematic analysis on policy coherence on key cross-cutting issues for sustainable development that we hope at least help practitioners and policymakers understand a little bit better the way in which policy coherence can be applied in practice. We recently launched a self-assessment toolkit, which aims to also help particularly those responsible in implementing the SDGs and coordinating SDG implementation to go through the 8 elements of the recommendation and identify strengths and gaps and some of the challenges in their institutional setup for SDG implementation in terms of policy coherence. So we try to look principle by principle. We try to assess what mechanisms are in place, who's responsible, and how the mechanism operates. And then we try to capture through this tool different levels of implementation or different levels of practice, so countries can see against the principles of the recommendation where they are and what areas will require further work. And this tool provides, for example, the results in a graphic way to help identify these strengths and gaps in the different areas of policy coherence, in the 8 elements that I mentioned before. Just want to conclude by saying that, of course, we at the OECD public governance have a wide range of instruments in many areas of public policy that are relevant. We have 16 instruments that cover most areas of public policy, and these instruments are relevant and for SDG implementation. And of course, as was mentioned by my deputy director, we at the OECD stand ready to support efforts to achieve these global agendas in a more coherent way. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to respond any questions you may have. Thank you. Thank you, Karia.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. I think this was an excellent way to set the scene. 1714 PCSD, it is a key means of implementation for the Sustainable Development Goals. So it was very helpful to see these 8 principles that you outlined that can help governments to overcome this challenge, which we know from the voluntary national reports, as well as from our bilateral discussions with countries and other international organizations, is indeed a key challenge for governments across the world. I want to give participants just an opportunity for, if there are any questions for clarifications now. We will also have an opportunity to come back to these complex issues during the questions and answers. But I do want to give you an opportunity, if you have specific questions on any of the slides that you would like to pose to Ernesto, you may do so now in the chat. Okay, I don't see anything on my end, so I think we will then move to the next presentation. And again, we can come back to all of this during the question and answer session later on. We will now be hearing from Mr. Chung. He is the president of the Daejeon Sejong Research Institute in Korea. I understand that he will share his findings and research with us by video. So I hope now that we have the technical requirements in place so that we can listen to Mr. Chung firsthand about his presentation and how to include the local autonomy perspective into SDG implementation. So thank you. If we could have the video started, that would be great. I think by now we are all used to this virtual reality. I'm being told the video will start shortly, so please bear with us. If colleagues could start the video, please, or if there is still a problem, indicate that, and we would move to the next speaker in the meantime. So it's a sign if this is possible would be great. I can see the thing moving, but we're not hearing anything. So yes, we will. Andrea in Moratti, I see that you are with us this morning. So perhaps we can then move directly to you and let you give us the perspective from the Italian side. Mr. Andrea Moratti is joining us from the Ministry for Ecological Transition in Italy. And Italy has been doing very interesting work over the past couple of years on policy coherence for sustainable development. So I think it would be very interesting for you to share some of those experiences with our Asian audience today, this morning. So please, Andrea, go ahead. And I apologize for jumping at you, but I'm sure you're ready to speak now, and then we'll turn to the video after. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. It's very early in the morning, but it's a pleasure for me to be in this panel discussion. As panelists that we heard before, we are in a collective effort globally to try to both implement our SDGs, but do it within the overall framework of recovering from COVID-19 pandemic. So my presentation will be brief. I'll focus on some of our efforts to implement PCSD in Italy and how these efforts are built around the project that we have presented to the European Commission and on which we're working with OECD. In order to better describe the project and the work we're doing, I'll just give a brief description of the current context in Italy and how we're trying to embed PCSD both in our SDG implementation efforts, but also in our recovery and resilience plan. Obviously, as I said before, the objective is to share experiences. We are all learning together on this journey, and these meetings are very useful for us to understand how to overcome some of the bottlenecks we have encountered, and how to move forward. Now, Italy has been struck quite hardly by COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected our social and economic textures and has set us back in the implementation of SDGs. As presenters said before, COVID-19 has also highlighted even more than before how we need to be able to better address the complexity of our society in an integrated manner. In this context, obviously, PCSD will be central. And for us in Italy, it has been a priority since quite a while. And we're trying to allow for PCSD to be embedded within the public administration at different levels, from the local to the central level. And because we believe it allows us to better address the challenges we have ahead and to make sure that we can prevent further crisis to be sort of severe on our country. So just a few words on the context. We are part of the European Union, and the European Union has acted quite swiftly to support countries within the EU to move out of the crisis caused by COVID-19. We have various mechanisms in place within the EU. We have a significant amount of funding that the EU is providing member states with. And to achieve this funding, we developed in each member state recovery and resilience plans. Italy presented its recovery and resilience plan in April this year, and it was adopted by the Council in July. The plan is quite ambitious. We have 6 missions that go from digitalization to ecological transition, infrastructure for sustainable mobility, education and research, cohesion and health. The plan has a total budget of 191 billion euros, of which 69 billion are in the form of non-repayable support, and the remaining 122 billion are in the form of loans. We also, in order to implement the plan, we also have to carry out significant reforms within public administration and justice, and some cross-cutting enabling reforms that are linked to the simplification of our legislation and the promotion of competition. So the recovery and resilience plan has to be completed by 2026, following a significant number of steps. And this is a great opportunity for us. It's probably the last to put our country on track, both considering the consequences of COVID-19, but also the ambition to achieve our sustainable development goals. It's complex because it touches upon different sectors in our society. It's complex because it involves a significant amount of funding that we need to be able to spend well, because it has to be repaid in the future. So it's very important for us to not work in a vacuum and to connect these initiatives within the overall framework of strategies we have already in place at national level. So in a way that we can couple the recovery boost that's coming from this plan with the long-term goals and objectives that we have set forward for the years to come in Italy. In this context, we are supported by a project on policy coherence for sustainable development. The project title is called Mainstreaming the SDGs in Italian Decision-Making Process through PCSD. The project is funded by the European Commission as part of the Structural Reform Program. And the Ministry for Ecological Transition is leading the project together with the DG Reform of the European Commission, and mostly together with OECD. We have been working very thoroughly and very well with colleagues in Paris, in particular from the Public Governance Directorate, but not only, they bridged out to other directorates. And we are at a very important stage in the project, and I'll just give you a brief description of it. The project will have the aim of the project is to provide support to improve our governance mechanisms of PCSD. And the overall aim is to produce a national plan for PCSD in Italy. and to link this national plan to our national strategy for sustainable development as an integral part. So it will be included, elements of the plan will be included in the means of implementation of our strategy, but the plan itself will also be annexed to the strategy itself. The plan should be completed by the end of this year and the first months of 2022. And how are we going to do it? The first thing we did is we started to analyze already a year ago the various mechanisms that we have in place in Italy on sustainable developments, but also on how we try to apply policy coherence within the country. And we use the OECD policy coherence for sustainable development approach. And we ran that approach through the various governance mechanisms that we have at national level. So we dedicated a first part of the project to a scoping phase. We produced questionnaires that we submitted to different levels of governments. We interviewed governmental authorities, and we organized 3 different workshops focused on different dimensions of PCSD. Here I'll highlight one of the first challenges we had was to bring everybody on board. PCSD is a priority for us, but it's not a priority for every single actor in the government. So it's important to create ownership and to support the involvement. We try to do that by creating a contact with central administrations to have line ministries involved. But we also try to avoid duplicating mechanisms. So we built our involvement in our scoping phase on mechanisms that were already in place in implementing our national strategy for sustainable development. So we reached out to local authorities, regions, and provinces through a vertical coordination mechanism that we already had. And we involved civil society and stakeholders through 2 different councils that we have set in place in our implementation process at national level. This scoping phase allowed us to produce a significant document that we call Governance Scan. And it's a mapping tool that we use to describe the governance system in Italy, but also to identify gaps across the different levels of government, and especially to suggest the way forward. In this moment, we are working together with OECD colleagues on our PCSD action plan. And we're working on this plan, building on the suggestions that came out from our mapping exercise. And the plan is now bouncing between Rome and Paris. We are having a significant number of meetings with our colleagues, especially in the Public Governance Directorate, and the support has been tremendous. And we are planning to distribute the plan to our coordinating actors at national level in the coming days. The plan, as well as I said before, will be integrated in a section of our national sustainable development strategy, and we are now working in parallel with the various levels of governments to in a concerted action to try to find to do the fine tuning with the plan. Again, as I said before, the objective is to finalize by the end of the year. Most probably will move into the first months of 2022. Both the plan and the review of our national sustainable development strategy will be the basis of our voluntary national review, because Italy will be presenting at the next high-level political forum in July 2022, our second national voluntary review to describe to the UN the work we have done on implementing the 2030 agenda. Now, I will conclude my presentation here just with a couple of reflections on the challenges that we have faced during these 18 months. And most of these challenges were linked to a certain type of resistance within public authorities to PCSD, but the resistance was not against the concept of PCSD, was more directed towards the need to simplify the work and not create additional tools. So the incredible work that we're trying to do now with the support of OECD is exactly that, to fit the plan in to existing mechanisms and try to fine-tune those existing mechanisms and through a PCSD lens. And by doing that, we're creating ownership. We're breaking the silos. We're trying to avoid overlapping and duplication. And we're trying to make the plan consistent with the activities that we're trying to carry out at a national level. Our lesson, if I have a lesson learned from this exercise, is exactly that. PCSD is conducive to the work that we're doing if we are capable to embed the exercise within those existing mechanisms and provide a tool for policymakers to be able to better navigate in such a complex framework. And I'm glad to be in this panel again. So thank you for giving us this opportunity. And I'm also happy to share further information if needed. Thank you very much, Karina. The floor back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea, for sharing this. Of course, I see these efforts, this ongoing project from the other side with my colleagues working together with you on this project. Before moving on, you spoke about some of the challenges that you faced so far in enhancing policy coherence. And then you spoke about the next steps with this action plan about embedding PCSD into existing national structures. And I was just wondering what you foresee some of the practical challenges to be in this regard, some of the upcoming challenges as you move forward with this project.
Well, as I was saying before, it's acceptance, it's ownership. We are asking public authorities to not to do more, but to work differently. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it's perceived as to do more. So together with colleagues from OECD, our attempt is to embed the PCSD action plan in existing mechanisms. And by doing so, we are bringing further people on board. We are working with the presidency of the council, for example, because they are working on aligning policy. They're aligning financing mechanisms that come from the EU with our national objectives, and it's a significant work that they're doing. And through the PCSD plan, we're trying to embed that work within the plan, and that's bringing further people on board. So it's more of an exercise of making the puzzle fit in the right place. Because as Ernesto said, many governments have those mechanisms, but some of those mechanisms are dormant, or some of those mechanisms do not really work together with other mechanisms. So it's also a fine-tuning exercise, and that's the most challenging part. But it's also when the pieces of the puzzle fit, it's quite satisfying.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, and indeed, this is also something that we are advising countries and some of the other projects that we're working on to make best use of existing mechanisms before starting to think about new mechanisms, because this is really the most effective way of, like you say, creating ownership and embedding PCSD into policymaking at the national and local level. I wish now to actually, if it's okay with you, Ms. Amanuma from IGES, to move on to you to give your intervention, and then we'll save the video for last. I hope this is okay with you. Ms. Sure. Amuna is with the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in Japan, and you have done a lot of work on the institutional mechanisms for SDG implementation in the country and region. So I will give the floor now. We're a little bit behind schedule, so if you could limit your presentation to 8 to 10 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I have learned a great deal already. And from my side, I wanted to share with you the institutional arrangement for implementing the SDGs in Japan, because we're based in Japan. We work with the Japanese government quite a bit. So the work on the SDGs in Japan is basically led by the SDG promotion headquarters, which is led by the Prime Minister and comprised of all ministers. So you see here at the ministerial level, you see the interagency coordination mechanism in place. And underneath this, there is a working level interagency coordination mechanism called administrative meetings. And so it's a working level interagency coordination. And besides that, underneath the SDG promotion headquarters, we also have the SDGs promotion roundtable meetings. And this is the stakeholder meeting comprised of representatives from NGO, NPO, and so on. And another important point is like what kind of strategies and measures Japanese government have. And important document to mention is the SDGs guiding principle, which is a mid to long-term SDG strategy. And also Japan has the SDGs action plan. It's developed every year since 2017. And this action plan basically lists SDGs related government measures. And the way that Japan promotes the SDGs is to facilitate the actions by other stakeholders. And one good example of that is that Japan provides SDG awards to companies and organizations with good SDG practices. The similar thing happened to cities. And the government also created an SDG action plan to coordinate or facilitate the knowledge sharing among stakeholders. The strengths of Japanese SDG implementation is actually localization. And as of, I think, last year, about 40% of local authorities in Japan worked on the SDGs. And, and 3 cities conducted the voluntary local reviews in 2018. And this was actually one of the first examples of voluntary local reviews. And IGES, my institute, supported that effort. However, it doesn't mean that Japan doesn't have any problem in implementing the SDGs. And they actually listed some areas for further progress in their second VNR they presented earlier this year. So their institutional mechanism, another one is progress evaluation. They also mentioned awareness raising and for behavioral changes. And they also mentioned mid to long-term planning and coordination to improve the process of VNR next for the future. But in terms of the remedies or what they can consider is that there are actually some other countries sort of overcoming these challenges through different ways. And IGES has done actually a study looking at Nordic countries and some European countries on their institutional arrangement. So, for example, in these 5 countries, they have involved a parliament, national audit office, national statistics office, expert groups, and youth representatives. So this is something that, of course, Japan, not just Japan, but other countries can consider. And in terms of progress evaluation, all these 5 countries listed there have developed a national SDGs indicators to measure or assess their progress at the national level. And in terms of awareness raising, I guess the simplest way to raise awareness is to conduct the awareness raising campaign. But some of these countries have raised awareness in a creative way. For example, in Denmark, they engaged the public in developing Denmark's national indicators on the SDGs. And by being involved in that process, citizens gain insight on the SDGs and they take more ownership. A similar thing happened in Finland as well. And in terms of the mid to long-term planning for VNR, Finland, for example, has developed the annual and 4-year cycle for the SDG implementation and evaluation. So I mean, some good practices are out there, and I think these good practices should be shared so other countries can learn from it. Finally, I just wanted to share, I just researched a little bit, and this is about, meta-governance perspective. So I guess governance, to implement the SDGs, there are different ways of, different styles of governance. They need to be combined. One type of governance is hierarchic, which basically look at the role of government. Another style is market style, and that focuses on the role of business. And network style focuses on the role of information sharing at the horizontal level among stakeholders. And when we look at the Japan's case, together with Vietnam's case and Denmark's case, all of these countries had market style governance as a predominant style. And in the case of Japan, the most frequent word that came up in our text analysis is promote technology and business. And so this is just one way of looking at SDGs implementation in different countries. And that kind of allows us to look at countries' direction and priorities behind the SDGs strategies. So I think earlier speakers talked about political will for policy coherence. And I think this kind of analysis might give us some insight on what kind of political will or directions each country might have. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amanua. I think this nicely complemented the presentation we had from Andrea. And it's interesting to hear some of the challenges and opportunities that you face at the local level in Japan also. You mentioned the preparation of this volunteer local review to the high-level political forum, which is a very interesting tool that we're seeing more and more citizen regions applying. You also spoke about the need for stakeholder engagement. So I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on how stakeholders were engaged in the process of preparing this VLR and what some of the lessons learned perhaps for other countries.
Right, thank you so much. So VLR are developed in a different context, but what I see, for example, in this particular city is that they face a really difficult, they face many challenges. The population is declining, the mountains ecosystem is kind of declining, business is kind of going in a not a desirable direction. So they want to address many challenges at the local level. So stakeholders get together with the city authority and they come up with the kind of vision for the city. And with that, they use SDGs to try to figure out how they can address the current challenges they have at the local level. So it's actually a really good exercise to integrate the SDGs to the city's planning and practices. So that's one aspect of the voluntary local review exercise.
Thank you. I think we will now move to Mr. Hong. I'm sorry, I jumped you in the agenda because I was focusing on the opportunity to share the video with us. But I think now we will move to Mr. Hong, Research Fellow of the Sustainable Strategy Research Group at the Korea Environment Institute, to give us his perspectives on some of these issues. So Mr. Hong, the floor is yours.
Thank you for introducing me. It's a great honor for me to discuss this forum. Okay, I briefly introduce the Sustainable Development Governance System in South Korea. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, cannot be said that the governance system related to sustainable development in Korea is integrated. As we all know, the Sustainable Development Goals consist of 17 goals and 169 targets were adopted.
Mr. Hong, can you hear us?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
I can see you waving on the screen, but I cannot hear you. If colleagues can ensure that Mr. Hong is
네.
co-host.
갑자기 안 켜졌죠? 계속 안 나오나요? 지금 나오나요? 그래요? 왜 잘 되던 게 안 되지?
While we wait for Mr. Hong's presentation or sound to work, I can encourage you again to write questions in the chat to Andrea, Ernesto, and Ms. Nabua. And then we have an opportunity to come back to those questions a little bit later.
들리죠, 이제?
한번 다시 해보시겠어요?
Ms. Amanu, I see a question for you in the chat. What does it mean by market style governance? Is this something you could reflect on?
Sure. So there's a study on meta governance by Newman and others. So all the information you might want to seek, it's actually there. But if I were to explain it, it's just that, for example, hierarchy style governance emphasize a lot on government role. So it basically puts a lot of words like regulation, ban, sanction, laws, act. So that kind of style is considered hierarchic style, but instead market style, it focuses a lot on business role in this context, the SDG implementation. So in the case of Japan and Vietnam and Denmark, which we looked at, we did a text analysis on this, and you can find a lot of words related to business role, like business, innovation, promotion. So that's what I mean. And in fact, in Japan, they have this slogan called Society 5.0, in which government put a lot of emphasis on business role in innovation for achieving the SDGs. And so that's, I don't know, I hope this kind of addresses your question.
Yes, thank you. It does indeed. It's clear to me, and I hope to the audience as well. If our Korean colleagues could now advise us if we have either a presentation by Mr. Hong from the Korea Environment Institute, or if we should move to play the video presentation by Mr. Chung, President of the Daejeong Sejong Research Institute. We would be grateful if you could clarify this so that we can move forward with the agenda. Thank you.
네.
I don't hear or see any of our Korean co-hosts. I take this opportunity then to turn to my colleague Ernesto and ask if you could just mention a few of the ways that we heard how we are working with Italy on policy coherence. Perhaps you could just mention some of the ways in which we are supporting other countries in mainstreaming governance tools into policy making. Ernesto, please.
Yeah, sure. Very briefly, maybe just to say that, as mentioned in my presentation, the instrument that we have on policy coherence aims to support countries in dealing on the how of a coherent implementation of the 2030 agenda. And the support we are providing is basically based on a method of going from different steps. We start with a kind of diagnostic based on the principles under the recommendation to understand where are the, as mentioned, where are the strengths, where are the gaps, what institutional mechanisms are in place, what tools, the type of skills required, and of course, the challenges in different countries are different, and of course the capacities as well, and the mechanisms. But what we try to look is at way the mechanisms they have function in terms of addressing synergies and trade-offs across different sectors, how they function in terms of using like monitoring systems, reporting systems to capture information that helps inform decision-making and change policy, actually. So through this method of kind of different models that we provide, we start with the diagnostic. Then, based on that diagnostic, we facilitate interministerial conversations. We help to develop some analysis also based on surveys, evidence, and of course, some of the analysis that we develop at the OECD. Not only, as Andrea mentioned, not only in the Public Governance Directorate, but working in collaboration with experts from different directorates at the OECD. And then, of course, one important aspect of these projects as well is the peer learning experience. Because sometimes, even if the challenges are different, if the mechanisms are different, some of the challenges are similar to the countries, and some of the solutions or some of the practices that countries have put in place are an inspiration to other countries to at least start the conversation among their different stakeholders on practical solutions. We have a very interesting exercise with different countries. For example, before the HLPF last year, we facilitated a peer learning exercise with Sweden, Colombia, and Spain about stakeholder engagement in implementing SDGs in a coherent manner. And of course, in the three countries, the efforts were different, and of course, the perspective and the challenges were different. But the means and the richness of the different perspectives help. For example, in the case of Colombia, they wanted to develop a mechanisms to bring together, a central mechanism to bring together all stakeholders and support implementation. In Sweden, for example, they didn't see the need for a central mechanism, but of course they shared the challenge that there is a need to engage more substantively different stakeholders in the process of implementation. Anyway, this is just to, and of course we are providing a very targeted support at the moment, not just to Italy. We are working with Poland. We're working with countries like Malta, Romania, with Luxembourg, where exactly what we're trying to do there is to identify the specific mechanisms that are in place that require to be strengthened to further enhance policy coherence. Anyway, this is just a broad perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. And of course, we're working with countries in different parts of the world, and we're hoping that this forum today is the start of a new partnership where we'd be happy to support and work together with your governments on both national and local level policy coherence. I see there are questions in the chat. Please let them continue posing your questions there, and we will take them towards the end, pending the time. And also, if not, we will get back to them afterwards for sure. The webinar will be available on video on YouTube, so we will have a chance to listen to all of you again. I now want to have confirmation from our Korean co-hosts if we have either Mr. Hong with us or the video. Could you please confirm?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Great, Mr. Hong from the Korea Environment Institute. We're very happy. We could see you before, but we couldn't hear you. So we're very happy to have you with us now. We'd be happy to hear your experiences for the next couple of minutes before moving on. So please share with us some of your experiences in the field of the environmental aspects of sustainable development. The floor is yours.
Okay. I'm very sorry with the technical problem, but it's a great honor for me to discuss in this forum. So I briefly introduce the Sustainable Development Governance System in South Korea. Unfortunately, it cannot be said that the governance system related to sustainable development in Korea is integrated. As we all know, the Sustainable Development Goals consist of 17 goals and 169 targets were adopted. The IAEG SDGs have developed a global SDG indicator framework to check the global sustainable development. Currently in Korea, in order to respond to the UN SDG, the UN 2030 agenda, the Committee on Sustainable Development is currently in charge. The Sustainable Development Committee is under the Ministry of Environment, not directly under the President or Prime Minister. Sustainable Development Policy of the Sustainable Development Committee is a complete nationalization of the UN SDG framework. The 17 goals are maintained, but detailed targets and indicators have been changed to suit the situation in Korea. It's called KSDG. The KSDG indicators are monitored and a report is published every 2 years. Because of the low status of the Sustainable Development Committee, it is difficult to say that the monitoring results have a significant impact on the policies of other ministries. Korea has other policy frameworks related to sustainable development. For example, the Presidential Carbon Neutrality Committee and the Korean version of New Deal. The Carbon Neutrality Committee acts as a control tower overseeing climate change response. It was launched by consolidation to several committees such as Green Growth or Climate Environment and Particulate Matter Committee. During the consolidation process, it was discussed that the Sustainable Development Committee would also considered, but it was cancelled. As a result, although sustainable development is a higher concept than carbon neutrality, its status has been lowered. Another related policy is the Korean version of the New Deal project. The Korean government is promoting the Korean New Deal project to stimulate the economy after COVID-19, which consists of digital green human New Deal. Sustainable development seeks to achieve social, environmental, and economic integration. The large-scale financial input of the Korean New Deal may affect the whole society, environment, and economy. However, the Sustainable Development Committee did not play a leading role in promoting the Korean New Deal project. Meanwhile, the Statistics Korea is in charge of responding to the Korean data in the global indicator framework. Also, Statistics Korea independently publishes Korea's SDG monitoring report using global indicators. I mentioned that the Sustainable Development Committee is publishing a National Sustainability Monitoring Report using the KSDG indicators for the sustainability monitoring. Both domestic and global indicators are meaningful, but they are not systematically linked and checked. Therefore, for policy coherence in sustainable development, integrated governance. Next slide, please. The policy coherence is integrated governance must be prioritized. Poor governance can lead to trade-offs between SDG targets. It may occur in terms of resource competition or budget competition. In Korea, there is a limit pursuing policy coherence due to the low status of the Sustainable Development Committee. A bill to raise the status of the Sustainable Development Committee is currently being proposed in Korean National Assembly. In the integrated governance, not only sustainable development, but also carbon neutrality, fiscal input, and monitoring system of the Korean version of the New Deal should be overseen. In addition, the policy coherence evaluation system should be established. It should be possible to evaluate the positive and negative impacts of policies from a sustainable development perspective. I think it is desirable that this evaluation system be handled by an independent auditing institution at the National Assembly level. OECD's toolkit would be helpful. I hope to see advanced OECD guidelines and indicators for this coming out soon. This is the end of my discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hong, for these insights and also for raising the issue of indicators, because we know that this is also another challenge that governments face. Indicators for tracking progress in policy coherence and good governance for the SDGs. It's not necessarily intuitive, so it requires using a lot of different indicators or establishing new ones. We have an indicator for policy coherence, for example, a global indicator, which is the number of mechanisms to enhance policy coherence. And of course, this is a very broad indicator, and UN Environment and also the OECD are working to try to tease out some of the details required to this exercise. And this links back to the 8 building blocks, the guiding principles that Ernesto spoke to us about earlier today. I am being told that we will, do we have any questions for Mr. Hong and his presentation? We will, of course, also be happy to transmit them to him after the webinar. Okay. I'm then being told that we will upload the video, which is prepared by Mr. Chung, Daejeong Sejong Research Institute, onto the webinar platform because of technical reasons. So I take this opportunity now, unless there are any other questions, this is your moment to ask them before we turn into a quick coffee break. So if you could type any questions in the chat, we would very much welcome that. And you can also continue to write your questions during the break, of course. With this, I would like to conclude and thank all our speakers and discussants for their intervention in this first session on policy coherence and governance challenges in SDG implementation. I have certainly taken away a lot of important lessons for going forward, and I hope that you, all participants, have also thought of some of the ways in which Asian Pacific countries can work together with the OECD and other international institutions, and also across level of governments to enhance policy coherence for sustainable development. And indeed, we will hear much more about the role of local governments and the need for vertical coherence in the session after the break. So I suggest we now take a few minutes to get a coffee and reconvene in 10 minutes. So at 5 to 5 Korean time. Thank you very much.
All right. Welcome for the second session. My name is Hyunok Lee from Yonsei University in South Korea. It is a privilege to be part of this forum. I learned a lot from the first session on the governance and the policy coherence for sustainable development. I'm sure we all did. And now we are moving to the second session on strengthening self-national engagement and the vertical coherence for the SDGs, which is really a critical topic in this area. We have 2 presentations and 3 discussions. Let me remind you that we are running behind the schedule a little bit. So I would like to encourage all the speakers keep your presentation within the time. Let me invite our first speaker, Mr. Stefano Marta from OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. Mr. Marta is going to present on the topic of localizing the SDGs. Mr. Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. Share my screen. I prepare. So the objective is to explain what the OECD is doing on the localization. In particular, in 2018, a program that is called a territorial approach to the sustainable development goals that has the aim to support citizens in implementing the SDGs and use the SDGs as a tool for policy making in particular. And I'm glad that regions that are working with us in this program, Bonn and Flanders, could make it today, so they can also provide a bit more details on what they are doing. The program has 3 main objectives. The first one is to learn how the SDGs at the local level can be used to reshape policies from up. The second is really the element of policy at the local level. So try to understand how the SDGs can be used as energetic sectoral policies to promote synergy.
I'm very sorry, but I am getting an echo from the Korean interpretation side. So if you have on the microphone, please turn off the microphone if you're not a speaker.
Also, where in particular we are collaborating. For regions to improve the multi-level governance and the coordination with the national governments. That is one of the pillars of the policy coherence framework of the OECD. The second component is on measurement. So what we did is to develop an OECD localized indicator framework to support citizen regions in measure the progress towards the SDGs. And the third component is peer-to-peer learning. So we have created, we are working currently with 10 pilot citizen regions that you can see in the screen, and Bonn and Flanders are 2 of the pilots. And what we do is to first promote an exchange of experience between them. When we did a mission in these countries, we always brought representatives from other citizen regions that are part of the group. Now we have created a steering committee where the citizens and the regions continue to exchange experiences. And every 6 months, more or less, we organize the OECD roundtable of citizen region for SDGs to promote exchange of experience with a broader community working on localizing the SDGs. But in terms of rationale for this project, why cities and regions are so important for the achievement of the SDGs? For three main reasons, and this is why we as the OECD, we started working on this program. The first one is that the SDGs are a shared responsibilities across levels of government. We estimated in our work with our analysis that at least 105 out of the 169 targets cannot be achieved without local and regional government. We know that in OECD countries, 60% of the public investment comes from cities and regions. And we are also observing that some national government, like Germany, Japan, are using the tool to improve multi-level governance, and they put in place some institutional framework, some support for the cities in particular. The second important point is that it is really key to measure on the SDGs beyond national average, because we saw also with the MDGs that if we only use national average, sometimes they can mask important territorial disparities. So maybe a country can be on track at the national level, but it can be strong territorial disparities within the cities and the regions in the countries. So it's important to have granular data. For example, with our indicator framework, we are seeing that 80% of regions and 70% of cities are not on track in OECD countries to achieve the SDGs. And then the third important element of our program is that the SDGs can be, beyond the compliance agenda, a tool for policy making, also for cities and for regions, because they can be a tool, as I mentioned before, to promote policy coherence, to work with the private sector, with the civil society, with the university, and so on. This is the indicator framework that we developed. It currently includes about 135 indicators. And the good news is that we cover all the 17 goals, both for regions and for cities in OECD countries. And the blue bar is the coverage for regions, and the gray bar is the one for cities, or for functional urban areas, as we call them at OECD. So the idea for cities to measure the progress beyond the administrative boundaries of the cities, and to capture also the neighborhood municipalities. We have a methodology at the OECD that is also endorsed by the UN Statistical Commission to define these functional urban areas in OECD countries. And as you can see in the slide, we have a good coverage for some of the goals, like SDG 8, 16, and SDG 1, while the coverage for others, like 7, 12, and 14, is less good, but still we can measure the progress for all of them. We also develop a visualization available for everybody. And it currently includes about 600 regions and 600 functional areas in OECD countries. So all the cities and the regions will be able to see how they are progressing towards the SDGs by just going on the website, compared to the OECD average, compared to their national average, compared to the cities and regions in the same countries, and also compared to the years that the web tool is suggested for each cities and region. Which are some of the findings of this analysis through the indicator framework that we have been developing this last 2 or 3 years of the program. The first one is that the majority of regions and cities, as I was mentioning, they are not on track to achieve the end values of any of the targets of the SDGs. The regions in particular, they lag behind in terms of climate, in terms of energy, ocean, biodiversity, and industry and innovation. While the cities, the main gaps for the cities are climate, biodiversity, and energy. And both the cities and the regions are lagging behind in terms of gender-related targets. But although there are some delays in achieving the SDGs, there are also some good practices and some champion, as we call them, cities and regions in implementing this territorial approach to the SDGs and in using the SDGs as a policy-making tool. I will just briefly mention in my presentation 3 of them, Bonn, Kitakyushu from Japan, and Viken from Norway, but Ine from Flanders will elaborate a bit more also on what the region of Flanders is doing. What I was mentioning, so the fact that 80% we developed this wheel, that this is for all regions in OECD countries. And you can see in the wheel that first of all, 80% of the region in OECD countries have not achieved the end values for the 17 goals. And then for some of the goals like climate, energy, biodiversity, industry, innovation, these are the ones where the regions are lagging particularly behind. This is the same figure for cities. 70% of the cities have not achieved the end values in 15 out of the 17 SDGs. And as I was mentioning, gender is one of the main gaps both for regions and cities. Not a single region in OECD countries has achieved the end values for SDG 5 on gender equality, and only 3 cities in Finland, Lithuania, and in Germany did it. But as I was mentioning, there's also some very good news that local and regional governments are taking the SDGs very seriously. And for cities, there's also a movement of cities that are producing voluntary local reviews, where they basically document how they are progressing towards the SDGs, how they are integrating the SDGs into their local development plan and policies. And this is also becoming a tool for exchanging experience with other regions. And also now starting developing voluntary local reviews for the SDGs. But for us, the key element is really how, beyond the voluntary local reviews, how the local and regional government are using the SDGs for improving their policy-making processes. We can see, for example, in the city of Bonn, what we have been doing in our pilot is try to understand the element of policy coherence at the local level. So the SDGs can be used by the local administration to make the trade-off between the climate objective, between the need to provide affordable housing and the need to maintain the green spaces in the city, and at the same time address some inequalities, or at least introduce some climate measure that will not have a negative effect on inequalities. And perhaps Stefan can explain a bit more what the city is doing on this. The province of Cordoba in Argentina, for them, the policy priority when they started using the SDGs was the social dimension. So the SDG from 1 to 5 plus SDG 10, because this is the political priority of the province. But what we did is in the to explain that they cannot just focus on one dimension of the SDGs and forget about the environmental and economic dimension, because they will lose indeed the policy coherence element that is the core of the SDGs. And so we developed a matrix together with the province that has the goal to understand which are the drivers of social inclusion in economic and environmental SDGs. So we developed this matrix through a participatory process, through workshop where we ask the local administration, the municipalities, the university, and the private sector in different workshops to provide a weight from +3 to develop these metrics between the synergies across the target of the social, economic, and environmental goals. And so we came up with this matrix that is really measuring the synergies and the trade-off between SDGs in the province. And the city of Kitakyushu in Japan is doing something similar. Is also trying to understand how one of the strengths of the city is the green economy, the circular economy, can provide opportunities to address some of the challenge in the economic and the social dimension of the SDGs. This is the city report where you can find these good practices and also the OECD checklist for public action to localize the SDGs that is based on 5 main categories: policy and strategy, multi-level governance, financing and budgeting, data information, and engagement. And in my last 3-5 minutes, I would like to mention also a recent, the result of a recent survey that we conducted with the European Committee of the Region to understand how the SDGs can be used as a policy-making framework by cities and regions in the COVID-19 recovery. The survey was structured around 3 main blocks. The first one was at the aim to understand the current state of implementation of the SDGs in cities and regions. And here what emerged is that, for example, the main action that cities and regions are implementing to achieve the SDGs, to localize the SDGs, are developing indicator framework and awareness raising campaign. The key element, according to the responded cities and regions, for successful implementation of the SDGs at the local level is political leadership. But it also emerged an important gap, the fact that only 50% of the respondents told us that their national government engaged them in the voluntary national reviews. So here, this element is still an area of improvement. The second component was the aim was to understand the relevance of the SDGs in the COVID-19 recovery phase. And what emerged is that the SDGs are, by 60% of the respondents, are considered a suitable framework for an holistic recovery from COVID-19, for a long-term recovery strategy. There are some gaps, in particular capacity, the fact that local and regional governments, sometimes they don't have enough staff to work on the SDGs, or also they are not trained to work on the SDGs, and also a funding gap, in particular in the COVID-19 recovery phase. Now, 25% of the respondents told us that there are less financial resources to work on the SDGs. And the majority of the local and regional government that responded to the survey told us that the main challenge for them is the social challenge in the post-COVID-19 recovery. And we also identify some policy and strategy that are key to achieve the SDGs in the COVID-19 recovery phase. I have a few slides on that, so I will explain them through the slide. This is what I already mentioned, that 60% of the cities and the regions consider the SDGs as an able framework for a more holistic approach to the recovery, and that the funding and the capacity gaps are what is still preventing cities and regions from using the SDGs in the COVID-19 recovery. And these are the policy and the strategy that cities and regions see important in the COVID-19 recovery. In order to achieve SDG 3 on health, cities and regions told us that considering the subjective well-being impact of local policy is one of the priority in order to contribute to good health in the recovery. They also told us that in order to achieve SDG 7 on production, the main and most important policy will be to decarbonize the electricity generation that produce to achieve SDG 7 and also to improve energy efficiency in the built environment. In order to achieve SDG quality, cities and regions see as top priority an efficient social and community service for the disadvantaged group, as a priority for achieving SDG 10. And I think I can conclude here, given that we are a bit late, but I'm happy to address any question you may have on my presentation. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Stefano. We had some technical issues, and some of the audience had difficulties to listen to your presentation. May I ask whether your interpretation function is on or off? Can you check?
I have the English one now.
Do you have the interpretation, the function at the bottom with the round thing?
Yes, and now is on English.
Yeah, and then make sure it is off. The interpretation, off. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, sorry. Thank you for your excellent presentation. And I think the issue of measuring the achievement, especially at the local level, is really challenging. At the national level, we have National Statistical Office, but often at the local level, it is very, very difficult to collect the data, even access to the data. So it was very interesting that you showed some of the efforts, and especially I found this interesting, the visualization tools and some of the metrics that you offered, like on measuring synergies, for example. So I hope that everybody can be benefited from your work. Now, let me move to the second presentation. Mr. Seung-Yu Park, head of the Office of Inclusive Regional Development, KRILA. His presentation is on SDGs and strategic initiatives of municipal level perspective. Mr. Park, the floor is yours. And before he presents, make sure that all the audience, please make sure that your mic is off, and then speakers, please make sure that your interpretation function is off as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, moderators. And hello, everyone. And good morning, Paris, and good afternoon, Korea and Japan. Okay, this time I will show you about the SDGs and the strategic initiative of municipal levels perspective in Korea. So this presentation consists of 3 sections. The first one is current issues and problem, and the second one is the 17 SDGs and how central and local government react for the SDGs in Korea. And the final one is about what to do regarding achieving SDGs. Okay.
Mr. Park, could you please speak louder, because
okay.
Yeah, some of the audiences mentioned that they cannot hear you well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is it okay now? Okay, what can you see from this slide? Until now, we usually focus on just economic growth, right? And we just pursue the growth, which give us some kind of a convenient economic, convenient life. And we just prefer the quantity, not just quality. So that's why this trend leads in the social gap, and especially the poor and the rich. Okay, what can you see from the right-hand side? The left side in the picture is the view about the living of the poor, and then the right side is the view about the living of the rich. There are only huge worlds between the poor and the rich. So our goal is the lowering the height of the world and converge the standard of the rich and the poor. Okay, as you can see from the various picture, this slide regarding SDGs, we just frequently consider SDGs is the climate change. Of course, it's very much related, right? Generally, we can just only think that the imaging regarding SDGs, the polar bear will lose their properties, glaciers, and then pollutant emissions from the industrial areas. But even the wildfires and the massive flood and the land turning into deserts are not our problem. So we just think that SDGs is not our business, but it's become our business. Okay, let's see the Korean situation. So the change of the day of a heat wave is like a 10.1 day a year, but it will increase triple times in the 2070s from 10.1 day to the 35.5 days. Also, now Korea has a 4 seasons, the spring to winters, but the Korea returning to having subtropical climate about 100 years later. So, okay, let's see the other slide. For example, there's a massive flood. Due to the massive flood, due to the climate change, the massive flood will affect negatively to people like a 6.38% decrease in the 2030s. Compared to the expected population growth rate is only 0.65%. So it might give us huge loss. And only that things, we can think another one, that is either affect to lose our land, like 5.86% of whole territories. So interesting, it's not a final estimated result. It might increase and damage more in 2070s. But it's not only problem of ours, right? So about climate change, we usually says that the increased temperature and the increase of the sea level are one kind of region and resource, right? So look at the Foreign Minister of Tuvalu, one of the nations in Oceania. So he stood in the middle of the sea and then made a speech. So voluntary migration will occur due to the climate changes. Also this year, September, younger people in Germany says that that means the older guys will die due to aging, but we, the young guys, will die due to the climate changes. Okay, so it's time to concern about the environment. So even though we just focus on the just economic growth, but we have to concern about the environment along with the sustainabilities. So it's time to realize the economic growth is not the real growth. The real growth is the growth along with the environments. So, okay, in the left side of the slide, so if we analyze the damage by income, the CO2 emission hit the peak around our income about $70,000, but the gross external damage will hit the peak around our income $130,000. So that means we'll experience the impact of CO2 emission earlier than gross external damages. So it's time we should have to restore our social community and the Earth ecosystem. Of course, if we concern about the economic growth along with the environment, the speed of environmentally adjusted value-added GDP growth rate is becoming slower, like 0.5% compared than the normal GDP growth. But we should have to turning our consideration into SDGs along with the climate changes. So I propose we have to add one more steps. Until now, we live in the development and the busy regions. In the first step, we live in the urban areas and then pursue only the physical growth. But as long as the cities are filled with people, the people try to move to the near region of the main cities. And then they move to outside of the main regions due to traffic jam and pollution and negative impact of urbanizations. But usually they get back to their main cities after regenerating older cities into the new one. So we have to add one more thing more, that is environment plus the urbanizations. That means we have to live, of course we should have to live in the urban regions, but we should have to concern and consider our environment. Okay, so let's see the second session, that is regarding SDGs and then how are central and the local government preparing for the SDGs. This section contains a vast contents of the SDGs and then how Korea responds regarding the SDGs with policies and our endeavors. Okay, as you already know this, and then the director, the honest Solia Morales, and then Mr. Hong Han-Hung, already show us about SDGs. It includes no poverty and zero hungers and gender equalities and then climate action and life below waters and the life on the land. So we, the Korean people, we mainly focus on the goal 7, some affordable and energy, goal 8, the decent work, and goal 9, the industrial innovation, and goal 10, the reduce inequalities. Yeah, many people, we know these guys, the BTS and the Blackpink, are very famous singer in my country. So in the second SDG moments, the BTS says that SDGs will give us a roadmap to get back on track. Also, Blackpink play a role as advocates in the UN's sustainable developments. Of course, there are so many controversies because they are singers. But important thing is they become acknowledged about SDGs and they are start to participate in, even though they are singers. So how about the best practice case of the SDGs in the municipal level of my countries? So Daejeon and then Incheon are the selected as the best case regarding the goal 7 affordable and clean energies. Daegu and Gwangju are selected in achieving goal 11, the sustainable cities and the communities. Especially they try to make their city safe. And lastly, the Incheon is selected in the goal 4 and 10 as supplying chances about the education and try to decrease the education gap and environmental gap. Okay, so how the rate and the extent of achievement about 17 SDGs in the central government level. So usually, so central government level, the Korea focused on the goal 3, the good health, and the goal 10 to 12, the reducing inequalities, sustainable cities, and the responsible consumption and the productions. And the goal 16 and 17, the peace, justice, strong institutions, and the partnerships. Okay, so how about the municipal level? It's a little bit different. So local regions are short of the achieving the goal 5, the gender equalities, and the goal 7 to 9, and the goal 12 and 17. Yeah, those pretty well achieved in the government levels. But goal 15, life on the land, are so weak in both central and the local level. And finally, we should have to see what we should have to do regarding SDGs. So we already hear about the PCSD, right? So UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that the world is challenging like never before. And he emphasized that the danger which will be shown up in the future, even now. However, we have OECD 2030 agenda. Also, SDG will give us a roadmap to get back on track. So according to the 4 OECD action areas, firstly, the applying SDG land is low in Korea. So we have to check the 70 goals and then 169 target first, and then try to share information about that. Also, the degree of we prepare about the implementation of SDGs and the sharing experience moderate. So we have to form to evaluate the system in both national and regional levels, and we should have to set target to converge national and national policy and SDGs. That is the same in the local level. And lastly, about the implication of the SDGs. Yeah, actually, I want to just say that Korea is ready for implementing the policy regarding SDGs, but that is just my hope. So we should have to share the SDGs case more deeply even from now on. So in order to set a goal and the target, so we have to check what is the issue related with the performance and then environmental issues. And we should have to check the common issues. For example, until now, we just focus on the growth, but we have to start to change our mind. That means we have to combine innovation, the R&D with the circular economy and the climate change and the carbon neutralities. And then central and local government administrate areas with combining ESG, SDG concept. In order to gain a success of the SDGs or to attain SDGs more easily, we should have to introduce newer technology. That means ICT, IoT, AI, the fourth industrial revolution, and the eco-techniques. So we have to make intelligent buildings and apply smart system and use, we can use or introduce regenerated net energy. Finally, we have to remember the role of the people. We should have to lead the people to participate in the process of making our policy and implementing those policies. with the help of citizenship, we can solve our problem together and get to attain the goal of the SDG relatively easily. So of course, we know if we divert our thinking towards SDGs, the speed of the growth will be a little bit decline. But it's time to realize that only economic growth is not the real growth. So we should have to think very carefully about the SDGs even from now on. Okay, thank you so much. And then I hope to see you guys in the near very safe future. Okay, have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Park. We completed 2 presentation sessions. If you have any clarification question, please type your question in the chat, and then later we will have Q&A session. I found the presentation is very interesting to highlight the Korea's efforts on achieving SDG, but I particularly found interesting for you to bring up the ESG. And I think with the discussion of ESG, it seems that the overall discussion on achieving SDG is shifting a little bit. Before we mainly focused on the role of the state and national policy and local government. And now business is kind of invited more and more for achieving this SDGs. But in the future, I would like to hear more how you combine the SDG and the ESG discussion. So now let me invite 3 speakers who are going to share their experience. Our first speaker is Bong-soo Kim from National Information Society Agency in Korea. Mr. Kim, the floor is yours, and you have 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. As you heard, my company, yes, my name is Bong-soo Kim. I work at National Information Society Agency, which usually help Korean government to make ICT policy and implementing ICT project. Those things are related to force industry innovation. So thank you for Mr. Stefano Marta and Mr. Seung-gyu Park. Their presentation will influence me to research these issues and matching ICT area. As a discussant, I would like to some cases in Korea. This issue usually related to reduction of inequality, especially ICT area. Would you show me my material for everyone? PowerPoint? Yes, and I try to explain by myself. There are 2 kinds of projects for reducing inequality and cooperation between central government in Korea and local government. Recently, Korean government supported to install digital social innovation project. That project defines social activities to solve problems and realize social value by utilizing citizens' participation and digital technology to solve various social problems that the government cannot read. So far, Korean government firstly initiate all kinds of innovation, not only a private area, but also public area. So the object to digital social innovation project to achieve sustainable city and community goals for SDGs by establishing centers to expand the base of digital social innovation and support related activities. There are key roles. First, to provide space and facility. Second, to discover and solve regional issues. Third, education. Fourth, to spread awareness. Lastly, is to establish governance and network activities of local governments. So one case is Seoul metropolitan city. That city to install digital social innovation centers. The main achievement so far is to promote DSI activities based on citizen participation. And another things to digital social innovation playground for networking activities. And lastly, to digital social innovation school for training professional manpower for educate common people to participate innovation of social issue. And second case between central and local government. One is Jeolla North Province. That province also is helped by a central government to create a sustainable DSI economy ecosystem in the region and supporting innovation activities centered on local innovators by the establishment of governance between related organizations. This local government also achieved to establish a regional cooperation system, such as a governance networking system, and to promote social innovation for social enterprise and digital professional education, similar to Seoul metropolitan city. And lastly, to demonstrate and spread the DSI project through the operation of a citizen, institution, corporate, and consultative body. COVID-19, after COVID-19, Korean government, as Mr. Sung-Kyu Park have already explained, the Korean government made a new digital project, including security and employment policy. So one of the digital New Deal policy is digital competence center. As I mentioned, due to COVID-19 outbreak, everything from basic uses such as kiosks and online reservations to daily life has been digitized. Digital empowerment of all citizens is essential to economic and social activity. So, Korean government from last year invested $64 million in 2021 to make the disabled, the old, or the poor people to possess their personal knowledge, especially ICT area, to use smartphone, tablet, computer, etc. So, so far, the achievement are to establish of 1,066 digital competency centers by 226 local governments nationwide, and to educate over half of a million people, including local residents, the elderly, and disabled. And furthermore, to strengthen cooperation with the local government and related organizations. The most important thing after COVID-19, the unemployment rate is so highly rising in Korea. So this project tried to alleviate the employment shock caused by COVID-19 by hiring more than 4,000 digital instructors and supporters. In the middle of the Doge case, Korean government create a lot of cases for help Doge people, including the aged, disabled, and poor. One of the thing is participation of all local governments and spread the digital education to including island and mountainous area to use ICT installed bus. And the aged and the poor people cannot access so easily compared with normal people. So train them to support the restoration to normal life, such as vaccination, reservation, and certificate issuance. So nowadays, similar to other worldwide economic crisis, try to digital transformation education support for market, merchant, and small business owners. Those we Korean government and ICT area enterprise evaluate the best case for cooperation with local government and central government. Okay, I hope this case to help to fruitful to understand Korean ICT issues and cooperation with local and central government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boom, for sharing Korean experience for digital social innovation, which is really a big part of Korean New Deal at the moment. So now let me invite the second speaker, Mr. Stefan Wagner from the city of Bonn, Germany. Mr. Wagner, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I hope you can hear me well.
Yeah.
Just start my presentation. One second. Okay, here we go. Yeah, once again, thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak on this forum today. I was asked to give some insight into how we, as a city of Bonn, located in Germany, are trying to strengthen subnational engagement and vertical coherence with regard to implementing the SDGs. Let me briefly start with some national background. As you know, Germany is a federal state, so we deal both with the federal national level as well as with the regional level here, the state level. And both on the national and on the state level, there are sustainability strategies put in place that have both been updated to match with the SDGs. The national German sustainability strategy was last updated in 2021 in the context of the Agenda 2030. And both strategies, also the regional strategies on state level that was updated in 2020, have a strong reference to the local level and underline the significance of cities and communities in reaching the SDGs. So, for example, German sustainability strategy refers to cities as key stakeholders and arenas of sustainable development and calls for sustainable, integrated, and inclusive urban development. So there's a strong context to the state level in our national strategy. The same holds for the regional strategy that also calls on cities to implement sustainability management linked to the SDGs. Let me now briefly report on how we as a city engage in vertical coordination on a national and regional level. Our mayor, who is in office since last year, November, is a member of what is called the Mayor's Dialogue on Sustainable City by the German Council for Sustainable Development. The German Council for Sustainable Development is an advisory body to the federal government in in the area of sustainable development in Germany. So it gives policy recommendations and proposals to the national government from a city's perspective. And we think this is a strong instrument that really refers to the needs and wishes of the cities when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs. And only lately, this Mayor's Council has adopted a call, an appeal for mobility, for changes in mobility management on local grounds. You need to know that some things cannot be organized on local level because we have to apply to national laws. And many cities like Bonn would like to have speed limits all over the city to reduce CO2 emissions, but this is not allowed on national law. So the cities are really appealing to the federal government to have more possibilities to, to regularize their own things on their own territory. Also on the regional level, there is a mayor's dialogue implemented, which is called Top Priority Sustainability. Also here, our mayor is part of this mayor's dialogue, and they give proposals and recommendations to the further development of the regional sustainability strategy. We also are using models and projects provided by the federal government. One is called Global Sustainability Municipality. This is a program funded by the federal government that helps cities to implement sustainability strategies. So to develop and implement local sustainability strategies, they provide know-how, they provide financing for this process, and I will tell you in a second on how we use these instruments. Let me now come to what we do in Bonn on local ground to really implement the SDGs. We have some history in sustainable development here in Bonn. We engage in this area for quite some while. We already were quite active on the MDGs, and now we have as one of the first cities in Germany, we have adopted a council resolution that commits to the implementation of the SDGs here in Bonn in local grounds. This was also the starting point for what I just mentioned for the development of a local sustainability strategy that was actually started in 2016 and was adopted by the city council in 2019. So this was almost 2 years participatory process that we started here in Bonn, including representatives of the political sector, but also, of course, of enterprises, of businesses, of the academic sector, of civil initiatives from the civil society, to really reflect on and jointly define strategic goals for strategic development until 2030. We decided on 6 fields of action that we particularly focus on here in Bonn, which is, for example, labor and businesses, social participation and gender, but also, of course, natural resources and the environment. All these 6 areas of action are matched with the respective SDGs, as you can see here in this little chart. And for all of these fields of mobility, of this field of action, we defined long-term and mid-term strategic goals, as well as specific measures and indicators on how to get there. So we can really measure and see how well we are doing on implementing the SDGs here in Bonn in this defined area. The first report to really do so and match our progress will be handed into the City Council by the end of this year. We also developed or published a VLR, voluntary local review, last year, also to demonstrate progress on implementing the SDGs, to have clearly published indicators and progress on all the SDG indicators that we follow. And this report was also, of course, handed in by the United Nations on the HLPF. We also do continuous education and sensitization work. We really reach out to our citizens. We do roundtables. We do SDG days where we really do action and activities throughout the city to engage people with this idea of a comprehensive sustainability management on local ground, and reach out to them in an interactive way. We also provide a lot of information also by our Adult Education Center, our cultural activities are very much linked to sustainability. So we have a strong sustainability movement that is also really also fired and fueled by the SDG, by the strategy that was passed in 2019. Let me come to a close also by briefly referring on the OECD program, a territorial approach to the SDGs. As Stefano mentioned in the introductory statement, we were very proud to be one of the pilot cities on this program. Our report as an outcome of this program was published in 2020, also describing the status of the 17 SDGs in Bonn, as Stefano already mentioned. Some of the policy recommendations are given are, for example, that we still need to raise the profile of the sustainability strategy as a guiding tool for political decisions here in Bonn. I think this is absolutely right. Even though the strategy was adopted by the city council, we need to remind regularly our city head of city administration, as well as the respective councils members, on really make use of this strategy and really also pursue the goals that we jointly decided. We strongly believe that such a strategy can really help local level to focus on strategic goals and to really have a transparent way in interaction with civil society to see how we can really implement SDGs on local ground. What is also mentioned in this report is that we still need to further foster the involvement of cities in national processes on implementing and measure and reporting to the SDGs. I think this is also right. Even so, as I just mentioned, we are in a good way. And let me therefore come to a conclusion on some of the takeaways from our perspective in Bonn and in Germany. We think there are still institutional challenges. Bringing together national and local regulation is a challenging part, since national legislation, local legislation do not necessarily match. So we need to have a more, I would say, streamlined SDG management from the national via the regional to the local level. I think there's still work to do in this regard. The cooperation, therefore, between national and local level need to be intensified. One good example, the voluntary national review by Germany that was handed in this year, that has an appendix, particularly on the cities and the role of cities in this process. I think this is already a good way forward. But of course, challenges appear also on local ground. This was mentioned. Of course, the implementation of the SDGs is a truly voluntary task. So it is, of course, it does require a lot of resources that the cities need to provide. And it's also important to get everybody on board to really, reach out to the citizens and really make them part of this movement. Otherwise, I think we cannot get to the goals that we, as the way we want to. I leave it this way because I have limited time, and I'm happy to share or discuss with you on any questions that might occur. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wagner. It seems that Bonn has a very sophisticated institutional structure, also have very vibrant interactions among various stakeholders. Maybe in the future, I would like to hear more about the Bonn's engagement with the civil society. And it seems that a lot of kind of ground level movements are engaging with this effort. Okay. Thank you. Now, let me invite our final speaker, Ine Wettens, from the government of Flanders, Belgium. Ine?
Thank you very much. How's the sound quality? Is it good?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Very good. Thank you very much. Flanders is situated, it's a small region in the north of Europe and in Belgium. And we have 6 million inhabitants. We have quite the interesting institutional arrangement. We are a federated state, which means that the competences are shared by the different governments. And we don't have a national government. We have a federal government, and the regional governments have a lot of competences. So I do believe that we are kind of in a hybrid situation where we don't have all the competences, but not exactly the same as some other regional governments. So our challenges are quite different. We were suggested to respond to some of the other discussants, and I was interested in the mentioning of Mr. Park of BTS and Blackpink. I think that it's not only very famous in Korea, but thanks to the Korean wave and Netflix, it's very famous here as well. And I very strongly believe that popular figures like actors and singers can reach citizens directly. So I believe they have a very powerful role to play in this scenario. And in Belgium, it's actually the Queen that is the SDG advocate, which is a very powerful tool during diplomatic relations. She's very strongly promoting the SDGs, and she's always very present during the high-level political forum, and she's very much interested in mental health. So we mostly have high-level side events on mental health. But that's kind of a side note, all right? So Flanders has also participated in the OECD project, a territorial approach to SDGs. So we'll start off where Mr. Wagner stopped. We took part in this project together with the Association of Flemish Cities and Municipalities, which was a very interesting dynamic because we had immediately this input of the local governments as well. We worked together very closely and exchanged information on the goals and targets and indicators. And it increased our understanding of each other and opened up new opportunities to work together. Even today, we are very much having open communications about how we use our indicator systems. I would like to go into the governance that we used because I think that would be the most interesting part of how we dealt with the SDGs. We very much focus on systemic change and transitions. We wanted to have a very strong transversal cooperation, which is very difficult to introduce. We started it off by having a long-term vision, Vision 2050, which has a set of goals and targets and a vision of where we want to be by 2050. And we translated these visions, where we want to go, where we want to be, into transition pathways. Now, we used to be quite hierarchical, how do you pronounce it, hierarchy, with a lot of hierarchy in governance. So we had a top-down approach in our governance and policy system, but we changed this a few years ago, and we started including our stakeholders, not only in the implementation, but also in the making of our policy, which was quite a new and interesting experience. So basically what we did is we invited our stakeholders and we sat around the table together and brainstormed on these visions and where we wanted to go and how we could do it. And we defined a few transition pathways. And then we decided together how we are going to follow these pathways, which actions we would have within these transition pathways, and then we set forward towards implementation also together with our stakeholders. So I think this was an eye-opener for many people in our government, and we still are learning how to implement this today. We also have goals and targets for 2030 called Focus 2030, which is basically the translation of the SDGs towards the Flemish situation and the Flemish government. It's 58 goals and targets with 111 indicators that we follow up on a yearly basis. So every year we take stock of how we are doing and we adapt accordingly. As was mentioned by Mr. Moratti, we also have resilience plans to recover from COVID-19, which is also very much focused on sustainability and recovering our sustainable economic and social situation. We have we have 7 ambitions, like decarbonizing our economy, digitalization, healthcare, including mental health, and leaving no one behind. As takeaways from the OECD projects, I think we do have a ways to go. For example, one of the main objectives would be to include the SDGs in our financing and budgeting. It is not realized yet, and it's a difficult process to reach this. So we will definitely have some more learning to do, and try to get the SDGs even more into our governance and our budgeting systems. I'm actually looking forward to hearing some questions. So I would like to close now and answer more questions on how we are translating the SDGs into our governance.
Thank you very much, Ine. Again, the bottom-up approach and the process of co-designing the policy is quite interesting. As I said, we are running behind the schedule, but still we have 5 minutes. If everybody agrees to have 5 more minutes, then we can end before 10 after 6. So if you have any questions, please write your question in the chat. Or speakers can ask questions each other. There is a question to Ine. Why did your government decide to move from top-down style to stakeholder engagement? What was the difficulty?
The difficulty or the reason why? The reason why is we had one case. Actually, it was kind of a bottom-up start in the ways that actually my colleague started with building a transition process around sustainable building and housing. And she just took the initiative based on, there was some research on how to conduct transition processes in the Netherlands. I think it started, and she just tried to put it into practice. She knew some of the large stakeholders, just put them around the table, discussed with them how they wanted to move forward, because there was a lot of resistance towards sustainable building and housing from the big players, because they didn't want to see all these difficult changes. But she just put all the parties around the table and discussed with them where they wanted to go, and kind of built from there. And it was such a big success that it moved up the ladder, and the minister saw its merits. And he said, well, I want to do this for all our big challenges, not only limited to sustainable building and housing. And that's actually where it started. And when you're asking about challenges, yes, of course, there's a lot of resistance in the beginning, and it's very, very important to get the right stakeholders. When you notice that some stakeholders just really don't want to move and they block everything, don't keep dragging, the same way forward. And you have to sometimes make difficult choices and say, well, we'll just move forward with the people that actually want to go there, and the other parties that procrastinate or that are very much against change. At some point, they mostly do see the merit and kind of want to be involved in the process again. So, yeah, that would be it, I think.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? There is a question. Questions for a quick response in a nutshell. Identify one obstacle in vertical coordination and one achievement. I guess it goes to every speaker. Andrea, is it for every speaker or just Ine?
It's for all speakers that have spoken about their work at local level.
Okay, thank you. So anyone who's ready can go ahead and start. So one obstacle in vertical coordination and one achievement.
I think I can be the first to jump into this one. I think some of the main challenges would be the institutionalization. You need to have the formal institutions to be able to have these discussions. And another one would be political will. As long as you don't have the political push to move forward to having this vertical coordination, it's basically impossible. In Belgium, we do have the institutions. So if and when there is political will, it's quite easy to move in this direction. We can just reassemble what is already there and invite the necessary parties around the table and push this forward. But I think you really need the high-level involvement.
Okay.
I can go next if you want, very briefly.
Yep.
So I think one of the challenge, and it also emerged in the project we are doing with Italy, with Andrea on policy coherence, is that sometimes the policy processes and the strategy are not synchronized between different levels of government. So there is a different timing and different priorities. So this is one of the challenge. And the other is also data information. And again, also here, very often, government at different levels are using different data system, different information, or there is no availability of granular data. So this is one of the obstacles that it's hindering the collaboration between different levels of government. In terms of successful cases or achievement, well, there are many, of course. I was not there for the first session, but I think Andrea maybe mentioned all this engagement process that Italy has put in place with the metropolitan areas and the region. It is a good example. In Japan, there is this Future City program where the national government is providing technical and financial support to the cities to develop strategies based on the SDGs. Germany, that was mentioned by Stefan, is another good example. So I think more and more national governments see the value of the SDGs as the common language, as a common framework for improving the vertical coordination.
Okay, any speaker in this panel?
Yeah, and then lastly, I will say about the obstacle. Yeah, maybe we can just think that obstacle is who will try to react first to get to the success regarding SDG. Maybe we easily think that with the budget, the huge budget, we can solve the problem, but I think we need people, right? So also we need some action and not just policy. So that's why we should have to invite the ESG to get to the goal about the SD. Of course, we need some policy, right? But to approach to the success of the attain the SDGs. So to do this, we need to know what the central and local government to regard SDGs. Also, we should have to think, and we need to find some consistency between old policy and then SDGs. So when we try to link the old policy and SDGs, we need some kind of course, we need some budgets, but we need people first. So if we got some people, the group of the people to they try to solve that problem, maybe we can easily get to the some goal about sustainable development. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner?
Just want to underline what all the other speakers already said. I think we need more policy coherence from the different levels to really make this a joint approach, but also taking into consideration, speaking now from a municipal level, the necessities on local ground that differ, of course, in various parts of our country. But yeah, more coordination, more coherence, and of course the political will, as was mentioned, is absolutely essential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gum, do you have anything to add? Not really. Okay. If that's the case, it's 6:10. I think it's a good time to conclude this session. Thank you very much for all the speakers and audiences for the great discussion and presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, every speaker and the audience for your presentation, intervention, and discussion. Well, before we start the closing session, I'm very sorry for a technical problem that causes inconvenience during the forum. And once again, I'd like to share that the video that could not be played at the first session, the titled New Perspective on the COVID-19 Pandemic and Local Autonomy, recorded by Mr. Jae-geun Jung, President, Daejeon Sejong Research Institute, Korea, will be posted on the web event page after the forum. So I hope you can play this video after this forum. Yeah, now we start the closing session of the APG Forum on SDGs. First, I'd like to invite Mr. Il-jae Kim, President of the KRILA, to give I'm sorry. I'd like to correct. Oh, yep. As we have I'd like to invite Ms. Tatiana Teplova, the head of the PC SDG division of the Public Governance Directorate at the OECD. Ms. Teplova, please.
Thank you so much, Chair, and dear all, good afternoon, good morning. I just would like to stress that I have enjoyed listening to our discussions here today, and I'd like to thank all of the speakers from around the world for having shared your experiences and lessons learned with us. As we know at the OECD, that knowledge sharing and peer learning, particularly when underpinned by robust evidence, are at the heart of sound policy making. And of course, I'd like to also thank all of the participants for having joined us from Asia and other parts of the world. And finally, a big thank you to our co-hosts, the Korean Policy Center and KRILA, and our respective institutions and networks bring a rich diversity of experiences that can help accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda at all levels of government. And I'd like to reiterate our gratitude for the engagement also of the colleagues from the OECD Directorate on Entrepreneurship, SMEs, regions, and cities to help connect this discussion to the local level. As was noted by various speakers earlier, the pandemic makes this discussion particularly timely, but also it's stressed that we have a shared responsibility to ensure that the progress on the SDGs is not down. And maybe let me highlight just a few takeaways, at least from my perspective, from today's discussion. First, we've heard that governments need support with the implementation and the alignment of the 2030 Agenda, climate actions, and we all watched really carefully the commitments at the COP26 meeting in Glasgow over the past several weeks, as well as recovery measures, particularly when it comes to the alignment at the different levels of government. And here coherence is essential to improve the efficiency of government actions, and policy coherence for sustainable development, PCSD, can really provide that roadmap, that compass to ensure alignment and efficient delivery. Second, participants also stressed the need and the importance of creating ownership of all government institutions for embedding PCSD into the mechanisms, the institutional and governance mechanisms and policy making, including at the local level. And I was actually particularly inspired by the various initiatives highlighted by our speakers from the local level. And finally, we heard the importance of the various dimensions of PCSD, be that the institutions, the political will, horizontal and vertical coherence and cooperation across all levels of government, stakeholder engagement, monitoring, evaluation, use of budgets, other government tools for creating synergies and avoiding trade-offs, and all of it to ensure inclusive recovery and sustainable development that indeed leaves no one behind. And with this, it seems clear, at least to us at the OECD, that we do need to step up our efforts if we are to deliver on our 2030 commitments on time. And this is not easy, especially in the pandemic context. This context and the imperative for the delivery call on strengthening capacities of national and local governments to address different global challenges that we discussed here today. And they also call for exploring new and innovative approaches and different ways of doing things collectively. So building on these priorities, we at the OECD will continue collecting data, good practices, and lessons learned from the implementation of this SDG agenda and PCSD, and work together with the countries towards a sustainable recovery. Maybe just a few efforts to super briefly highlight. Next week, at the next meeting of the focal points for policy coherence, the 21st meeting, we will be launching a practical guidance note to help countries implement PCSD, and in particular the OECD recommendation on PCSD, as was mentioned by our Deputy Director Janusz Bertok and Ernesto, as well as other speakers. And this note will highlight good practices that we have collected from our members, from our partners, and it will be serving as a living document. And here I'd like to invite all of the Asian countries who did not have an opportunity to participate in the process of preparing a note, but to continue building this repository with your national and local experiences, and some of which we heard about here today, and also contribute to this work. In parallel, we are working to develop an online observatory on PCSD. This tool is intended to serve as an inclusive and web-based platform, which will provide practical guidance tools and a comprehensive database on PCSD experiences from around the world. And last but not least, I'd like to encourage countries from the Asian region, and of course all of our member countries and other partner countries, to make use the OECD support of the OECD tools. We stand ready to be working with the countries either in doing country or institutional reviews and assessments, or providing technical support where necessary in drafting or implementing or evaluating PCSD strategies and action plans, or building capacities of civil servants to ensure that the SDG agenda becomes a reality. So to conclude, I'd like to stress that I am confident that this forum will pave the way for new collaboration and partnerships. And I'd like to thank you again for having joined us. And I also would like to thank the teams in the KPC, KRILA, and the OECD for making this dialogue a reality. We look forward to continuing our journey together, and I hope we will be able to meet soon and also engage in person. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tatiana. Well, now we have a final speaker, Mr. Il-jae Kim, the president of the Korea Research Institute for Local Administration. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, it's nice to see all of you today. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the participants who attended today's forum and helped to make such a successful event. It was indeed a great contribution by the participants to share their expertise and views on ways to strengthen the implementation of SDG. As you know, and as we discussed today, in recent years, discussions on sustainable development have been increasing at the local level, while efforts are being made to protect the environment and improve the lives of local residents and to shy away from unconditional growth strategy. And in this context, I believe today's forum was highly meaningful to seek for practical ways through the presentation and sharing of best practice and experiences on national and local policy for achieving SDG. I hope to continue cooperation among countries to achieve SDGs. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to every member of OECD Public Governance Directorate and the OECD Korea Policy Center for their hard work and professionalism in making this event a great success and meaningful for all of our partners, and look forward to continued cooperation between KRILA and the OECD. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this wraps up our APG Forum on SDGs. We truly thank you to all participants for staying with us until late time. I wish you stay safe and looking forward to meeting you all again on the next occasion. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.